Welcome to Hidden Wounds. I am about to recount an experience that will fundamentally alter your perspective on dignity, retribution, and the steep price of underestimating a man who possesses more influence than you can fathom. This is the chronicle of Arthur Ellison, a 65-year-old man who taught a gold-digging bride the unforgettable lesson of why you never challenge someone who wields power you fail to recognize. If you have ever been publicly demeaned, if your value has ever been questioned because of your age, if you have stood by helplessly while someone you love was deceived by a manipulator, then you can comprehend the fire that ignites when a profound injustice is left unanswered. Today's tale is about what unfolds when that fire is not wasted on emotional outbursts, but is instead channeled into a strategic, devastating, and permanent resolution. My name is Arthur Ellison, and I am 65 years old. I don't share this because my age defines me, but because it lends gravity to the story I am about to tell. At 65, I have come to understand that respect is not something freely given, it is commanded. And when someone has the audacity to disrespect you in a public forum, in front of the very people who matter, you don't simply turn the other cheek. You ensure they never forget why they should have exercised restraint. It was October 15th, a Saturday that was meant to be picturesque. The autumn foliage adorned the venue in hues of amber and gold, the exact shades I had stipulated when I personally funded this entire wedding. Every last detail, from the handcrafted arrangements of white roses and silver dollar eucalyptus, to the magnificent crystal chandeliers that graced the reception pavilion, was a testament to my involvement, my funds, my taste, my final approval. I was seated in the third row, a deliberate slight, as the father of the groom traditionally occupies a place of honor in the first. But Isabella Vance had made her position abundantly clear. I was merely an accessory to this event. She was my son Leo's bride, the woman who was about to be grafted onto my family tree, regardless of my reservations. But allow me to state something unequivocally. I am not a man who recedes into the background. Even at 65, with my silver-streaked hair impeccably styled and my late wife's heirloom watch on my wrist, I command a certain presence. I always have. The hushed tones that followed me as I found my seat were not born of pity, but of recognition. Arthur Ellison doesn't just show up to events, he defines them. The ceremony unfolded precisely as I had planned. The string quartet performed Pachelbel's canon as the bridesmaids, dressed in dusty rose gowns, made their way down the aisle. Then came Isabella, 28 years old, and radiating a kind of beauty that assumes it can vanquish any obstacle. Her custom designer gown, which cost more than a luxury sedan, trailed behind her like a river of silk. My son Leo stood at the altar, 32 years old, still clinging to the naive belief that love is all-conquering. He was still convinced that his father's misgivings about his bride stemmed from possessiveness rather than hard-won wisdom. He was still under the illusion that Isabella Vance loved him for something more than his inheritance and our family name. I observed the proceedings with the same placid, attentive, and utterly inscrutable expression I wear during high-stakes business negotiations. Inwardly, however, I was calculating. You see, I had been orchestrating this moment for months. Not the wedding itself, but the reckoning that was poised to erupt. The reception started without a hitch. Guests socialized on the country club's terrace, enjoying champagne that I had personally chosen and paid for. The photographer snapped pictures of manufactured joy that would soon become relics of humiliation. The band, a jazz ensemble from New York that set me back 15-0, provided a sophisticated soundtrack as people toasted what they mistook for love. I held my composure through the cocktail hour, the dinner service, and the long line of speeches praising the blissful couple. But I was biding my time. Patience, as I've learned, is the most formidable weapon in one's arsenal. It was during the father-daughter dance that Isabella made her way to my table. She had changed into a shorter reception dress, also funded by me, and her face was flushed with a combination of champagne and arrogance. She leaned in, so close I could smell her perfume, a fragrance I had gifted her months prior. "Arthur," she began, her voice just loud enough for the adjacent tables to overhear, "I have to ask you something." I looked up at her, my face a mask of calm. "Of course, dear. What are you even doing here? You weren't on the final guest list." The words seemed to hang in the air, a toxic cloud enveloping us. Nearby conversations faltered. Wine glasses stopped in midair. The quartet played on, but their music dissolved into a dull hum. I have been insulted in my life. I have been underestimated, dismissed, and challenged. But never, not once, had someone dared to question my right to occupy a space that I had single-handedly paid to create. Never had someone been so reckless as to publicly humiliate Arthur Ellison. I rose from my chair slowly, my movements measured and dignified. At 6 feet tall, I had to look down slightly to meet her gaze. "You're absolutely correct," I said, my voice possessing the cold precision that had built my real estate empire. "I should probably leave." A flicker of triumph crossed her face. She believed she had won. But first, I continued, reaching into my jacket for my phone. "I've brought someone along who I believe you should meet. A friend of yours." I sent a single 2-word text. "It's time." "Who?" Isabella asked, but her tone had shifted. A note of uncertainty had crept in, a slight tremor suggesting the dawning realization that she had made a grave miscalculation. "Someone who knows you intimately," I said, a faint smile touching my lips. "Someone who has missed you a great deal." The grand terrace doors swung open, and a man stepped through. He was tall, dark-haired, and wearing a tailored navy suit that I had helped him choose. When Isabella saw him, when she processed who was striding toward us with a look of focused, barely restrained fury, she made a sound that will be etched in my memory forever. It was the sound of a person watching their entire world shatter in an instant. "Hello, Isabella," said Julian Croft. The man she had been seeing for the past 6 months. The man she had promised to leave my son for. The man who was, unknowingly, the chosen instrument of my justice. Isabella's knees seemed to give way. She gripped the edge of the table to steady herself, her face completely drained of color. "Julian, what are you? How did you?" "Surprise," I said softly, taking a step back to allow them space for the impending implosion. "I thought your wedding guest deserved to meet your other fiancé." The silence that fell was absolute. The band had finally stopped playing, and I smiled. Before I reveal what transpired next, allow me to pause and speak to you directly. If you've ever been publicly shamed, if you've been made to feel that you don't belong, if you've been written off because of your age or your perceived station in life, then you understand the inferno that was raging in my chest that day. This channel exists because men and women like us, people who refuse to be silenced, dismissed, or forgotten, have stories that demand to be heard. Stories that serve as a reminder that respect is non-negotiable, and that sometimes justice is delivered with quiet, calculated precision. If you are ready to hear how a 65-year-old man taught a 28-year-old schemer what true power looks like, stick around, because this story is only just beginning. Let me take you back to the start, because retribution is never the result of a single moment. It is the culmination of a pattern, of an accumulation of slights, of a slow, steady build-up of pressure that inevitably leads to a fracture. I became a widower at 50, My wife, Eleanor, was killed in a car accident on a rainy Thursday morning, leaving me with a 30-year-old son, a portfolio of real estate, and enough grief to swallow me whole had I allowed it. But I chose another path. I chose to build. Over the next 12 years, I transformed our modest investments into an empire. I acquired distressed properties, renovated them with an unwavering commitment to luxury, and sold them to discerning buyers who valued quality. I learned to interpret market trends with the skill of a fortune teller and to read human nature like an open book. By the time I turned 60, my net worth was beyond what most people could imagine, and I had earned every last dollar through intelligence, persistence, and a steadfast refusal to be undervalued. My son, Leo, grew up watching me reconstruct our lives from the wreckage of loss. He learned to value strength, intelligence, and integrity, because those were the principles I embodied daily. So when he brought Isabella Vance home 18 months ago, my instincts told me immediately that she was a poor match for him. It wasn't about her background. I'm no snob when it comes to money, as I vividly remember the days of worrying about mortgage payments. It wasn't the age difference. 8 years is insignificant when two people are adults. It was something else entirely. Something that triggered every alarm bell I had honed over decades of judging character. Isabella was beautiful. I'll grant her that. She had blonde hair that captured the light perfectly, blue eyes that seemed to overflow with promises, and a figure that could make men abandon their better judgment. She could be charming when it suited her, was sharp enough to navigate a complex conversation, and clever enough to spot an opportunity. But I saw straight through the facade. I noticed how her eyes appraised the value of every object in my home on her first visit. I observed how she expertly positioned herself in family photographs to appear as if she had always belonged. I heard her seemingly innocent inquiries about Leo's trust fund, my property holdings, and our family's financial arrangements. Most revealingly, I watched how she treated people she deemed insignificant. The housekeeper whose name she never cared to learn, the valet at a restaurant who was beneath her notice, the elderly waiter at Leo's birthday dinner who she felt moved too sluggishly. Character, I've long believed, is revealed by how we treat those who can offer us nothing in return. Isabella's character was as shallow as a rain puddle. But Leo was infatuated, and love can make even the sharpest men blind. Every concern I voiced was met with accusations of being an overbearing, meddling father. Every observation I shared was brushed aside as a parent's difficulty in letting go. So I ceased voicing my concerns and began documenting them. 3 months after their engagement, I hired a private investigator. James Morrison was discreet, thorough, and expensive, exactly the kind of professional I needed. I didn't instruct him to dig for dirt. I told him to find the truth. Sometimes they are one and the same. The truth about Isabella Vance was repellent. She had been previously engaged to a man named Julian Croft, the owner of a chain of boutique hotels. She ended that engagement shortly after meeting Leo, citing a need for personal growth and claiming their relationship had simply run its course. What she neglected to tell Julian was that she had already moved in with my son. What she failed to tell Leo was that she was still sleeping with Julian. Morrison's final report was a dossier of her deceit, complete with photographs, credit card statements, hotel bookings, and text messages. Isabella was playing a dangerous game with two men, keeping both of them invested while she weighed which one presented the more lucrative long-term future. The evidence was comprehensive, damning, and entirely legal to acquire. I read the report from cover to cover, twice, then secured it in my safe. I didn't confront Isabella. I didn't show it to Leo. I simply waited and planned. You see, exposing a betrayal is only half the victory. The other half is choosing the precise moment for that revelation to inflict the maximum possible damage. And what moment could be more flawlessly ruinous than her wedding day, the very day she stood before everyone she knew and vowed to forsake all others? I spent the ensuing weeks cultivating a relationship with Julian Croft. It began with a chance encounter at a gallery opening that Leo was unable to attend. This led to a sympathetic conversation about lost love and new beginnings. I slowly forged a friendship built upon the bedrock of his wounded pride and my apparent understanding of his heartache. I never lied to Julian. I never offered him anything more than a listening ear. I simply absorbed his story, expressed my condolences, and occasionally mused about what a pity it was that Isabella had seemingly chosen financial security over genuine passion. I planted the seeds, and his own resentment watered them. The day before the wedding, I called Julian with fabricated news. I pretended to have just learned of Isabella's impending marriage. I told him she had been dishonest with him about Leo all along, that she had used him while securing her future with another man. "She's making the biggest mistake of her life," he said, his voice taut with suppressed rage. "Perhaps someone ought to tell her that," I replied gently. And that is how Julian Croft came to be standing on the terrace at my son's wedding reception, primed to confront the woman who had betrayed him. He believed he was there to win her back, or perhaps to avert a tragedy. He was entirely unaware that he was there to serve as my weapon. The expression on Isabella's face when she saw him was worth every single dollar I had spent on that wedding. It was the look of someone realizing that their meticulously built fortress of lies was about to be reduced to rubble. It was the look of someone who had finally met their match in a game they were convinced they were winning. Let me tell you about Julian Croft, because to understand him is to appreciate the perfect architecture of this revenge. Julian was 35, successful, and handsome in a way that often made women overlook his shortcomings before they even discovered them. He was the proprietor of 7 boutique hotels across the Northeast, each one more elegant than the last. He possessed the quiet sophistication that comes from a lineage of wealth and private education, but he also had the drive to build something significant with the advantages he was given. More importantly, he had been truly in love with Isabella. When I first made contact with him, and yes, I orchestrated that meeting at the Morrison Gallery, the wound of her betrayal was still fresh. It wasn't just the breakup that stung him, but the manner in which she had executed it. One day, they were discussing a spring wedding. The next, she was returning his grandmother's engagement ring with a vague speech about needing to find herself. Men like Julian are not accustomed to rejection. They expect to be the prize. When Isabella left him, she didn't just break his heart. She shattered his ego. And a shattered ego, when carefully manipulated, can be honed into an instrument of devastating precision. Our first interaction was at the gallery's wine reception. My presence was legitimate. I sit on the board, but I had seen his name on the guest list and knew he would be there. "That's a striking piece," I commented, approaching him as he studied an abstract painting, all sharp angles and chaotic colors, much like the situation I was engineering. He turned, and I saw the instant of recognition in his eyes. He knew who I was. "Mr. Ellison, Arthur Ellison, please call me Arthur, and you're Julian Croft. I've heard excellent things about your hotels." What I omitted was that I had heard these things because I had meticulously researched every facet of his life. We spoke for 20 minutes about art and business. He was intelligent, articulate, and visibly wounded. Perfect. As our conversation concluded, I said, "I should mention, my son Leo is getting married next month. Perhaps you know his fiancée, Isabella Vance." The shift in his demeanor was immediate and stark. A flash of pain crossed his features, swiftly replaced by something harder. "I knew Isabella," he said, choosing his words with care. "We were close. I hadn't heard she was engaged." "Oh dear," I said, my voice full of perfectly feigned concern. "I hope I haven't spoken out of turn. I just assumed it's a small world." I allowed the silence to stretch between us. Then, with the expert timing that had served me so well in my career, I made my move. "Perhaps we could get coffee sometime. I find it's always valuable to connect with people who understand quality and integrity." He agreed. Of course he did. Wounded pride seldom declines an offer of validation. Over the next few weeks, I became Julian's confidant. We met for coffee, for lunch, at charity functions. I listened patiently as he tried to make sense of Isabella's abrupt departure. I never criticized her directly. That would have been too clumsy. Instead, I let him form his own conclusions by sharing carefully curated observations about my future daughter-in-law. "She's quite focused on security," I'd mention offhandedly. "Leo's trust fund seems to provide her a great deal of comfort." Or, "I admire her ambition. She's very clear about wanting to position herself advantageously in society." And, most effectively, "She seems to have a real gift for telling people exactly what they want to hear." Each statement was true, delivered with apparent fatherly affection and designed to plant seeds of doubt about Isabella's character. 3 weeks before the wedding, I showed him a portion of the private investigator's report, just the parts that documented the overlap in her relationships with him and Leo. The hotel receipts from weekends she spent with him while living with my son. The text messages where she professed her love to both men concurrently. "I thought you deserved to know," I said gently. "I thought you should have the truth about why she really left." Julian's reaction was everything I had hoped for. Anger at being deceived, humiliation at being made a fool, and a potent desire for justice that I could harness. "She played me," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Yes," I agreed. "She did. And Leo has no idea what she's truly like. Someone should tell him." And there it was. The moment my weapon was armed and willing, I didn't need to suggest he confront her at the wedding. I simply remarked on what a shame it was when good people were deceived, and wondered aloud if Leo would want to know the truth. Julian volunteered to be the messenger. The plan we devised was simple and brutal. He would attend the reception as my guest. He would wait until Isabella was at the peak of her confidence, surrounded by friends and family, at the moment when her public downfall would be most complete. Then, he would present the evidence of her treachery. Julian was convinced he was acting for the sake of justice, to save a good man from a terrible mistake. He had no idea he was merely an instrument of my revenge against a woman who had dared to disrespect me. The beauty of it was his righteousness. He genuinely believed he was the hero of the story, which made him the perfect villain in hers. Standing on that terrace, watching the color drain from Isabella's face as she realized her past had come to claim her future, I felt the deep satisfaction of a perfectly executed plan. Julian stepped forward, his voice resonating across the now silent reception. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, addressing the crowd, "I think there's something you all should know about the bride." The terrace fell into a hush that only occurs when people sense they are about to witness something truly memorable. Conversation ceased. Champagne flutes froze. Julian stood at the center of it all, impeccably dressed in the navy suit I had helped him select, radiating the righteous anger of a man exposing a great injustice. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he continued, his voice clear and strong. but I believe you all deserve to know who you're really celebrating tonight." Isabella had turned a ghostly white. She clutched Leo's arm, but he was just staring at Julian, his face a mask of confusion. "Who the hell are you?" Leo demanded. "I'm Julian Croft," he replied, extending a hand as if it were a perfectly normal introduction. "I'm Isabella's fiancé, or I was, until she decided she preferred your trust fund to my affection." A collective gasp rippled through the guests. I watched their faces, seeing the moment polite confusion morphed into scandalized fascination. These were people who fed on gossip, who lived for the moments the polished veneer of their social world cracked open. "That's not true," Isabella stammered, her voice a faint whisper. "Leo, he's lying." "I have proof," Julian interrupted, pulling a folder from his jacket. "Hotel receipts, text messages, photographs. Would you like me to share them with your guests?" "This is insane," Leo said, looking from his new wife to the stranger, claiming to be her other fiancé. "Isabella, tell them this is crazy." But she couldn't speak. She was frozen, trapped. I had positioned myself perfectly to observe it all. Isabella's rising panic, Leo's bewilderment, the guests' rapt attention, and Julian's controlled fury. It was better than theater, because it was real. "Show them," I said quietly, just loud enough for Julian to hear. "Show them who she really is." He opened the folder. The first item was a photograph of Isabella and Julian at dinner 2 months prior, her hand on his, both looking intimate. "This was taken in February," Julian announced. 2 months after she moved in with you, Leo. 2 weeks after she returned my grandmother's ring." He held up another photo. "This is from a weekend at the Plaza Hotel in March. She told you she was visiting friends, didn't she?" The murmuring in the crowd grew. People were craning their necks, pulling out their phones to record the unfolding drama. This wasn't just a scandal. It was social media gold. "Stop!" Isabella finally cried out. "Please, stop." "I understand perfectly," Julian said, his voice cutting through her plea. "You were engaged to both of us. You were planning 2 futures, living 2 lives, telling 2 men you loved them." He pulled out printed text messages. "Should I read these aloud? The ones where you told me you missed me while you were planning this wedding? The ones where you said Leo was just a phase, that you were coming back to me?" "Don't," Leo said, his voice weak. He was starting to realize his perfect day had become a public nightmare. Julian ignored him. "My personal favorite is from 3 weeks ago. Quote, Julian, I miss you so much. Leo is sweet, but he's not you. I just need to get through this wedding for my family. Then we can be together the way we always planned." The silence that followed was deafening. Every person on that terrace now understood they were witnessing the complete and utter demolition of a marriage less than 6 hours old. Isabella made a sound somewhere between a sob and a gasp. Her knees buckled, and she would have collapsed if Leo hadn't instinctively caught her. But even as he steadied her, I saw the love in his eyes begin to curdle into something else. "Is it true?" he asked, his voice hollow. "Were you seeing him?" Isabella looked up at him, and in that moment I saw her make the fatal calculation. Instead of confessing, she chose to lie. "It's not what it looks like. He's obsessed with me. He's been stalking me." It was precisely the wrong thing to say. A fresh wave of anger washed over Julian's face, and Leo recoiled from her as if she'd struck him. "Stalking you?" Julian's voice was now laced with ice. "Is that what you call it when you invited me to your hotel room last month? When you told me you loved me? When you said you were only marrying him for security?" He turned to the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, you are witnessing the wedding of a woman who was engaged to 2 men at once. and who just accused me of stalking her rather than admit the truth. The crowd was no longer murmuring. People were talking openly, pointing, recording. And through it all, I stood perfectly composed, watching the destruction of the woman who had dared to humiliate me. This was better than I could have imagined, because Julian's righteous indignation made him a credible witness in a way I never could have been. David looked at his wife of 6 hours, as if she were a total stranger. "Is it true?" he asked again. "Any of it?" Her composure finally shattered. "David, please, can we discuss this in private?" "These people came to celebrate our wedding," he said, his voice gaining strength as his anger mounted. "These people deserve to know if they're celebrating a lie." "Answer him," Julian demanded. "Tell him the truth, Isabella." Cornered and desperate, she finally did. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I was seeing both of you. But David, I chose you. I married you. That has to count for something." It counted for everything. It signified the end of her marriage, the ruin of her reputation, and the beginning of a long chain of consequences that would follow her for the rest of her life. What you just witnessed wasn't just about revenge. It's about the undeniable power of truth. Isabella thought she could disrespect me because I was older, because I was just the father-in-law, because she believed her youth and beauty were impenetrable shields. But real power has nothing to do with age or appearance. Power is about knowing your own worth and refusing to let anyone diminish it. If you're watching this and have ever been made to feel invisible or irrelevant, I want you to understand that your experience is your strength. Your wisdom is your weapon. Your time isn't over. It's just beginning. But for now, let's return to that terrace, because Isabella's humiliation was far from over. The explosion that followed Isabella's confession was a spectacle. I have attended countless social functions in my life, but I have never witnessed anything like the collective shock and immediate judgment that erupted from 200 wedding guests. Leo stood frozen for what felt like an eternity. His face was a canvas of shifting emotions: confusion, hurt, rage, and finally, a cold resolution that I recognized from my own reflection. 6 hours, he said, his quiet voice cutting through the noise. "We've been married for 6 hours and it was all a lie." "I'm not lying anymore," Isabella pleaded. "I told you the truth. I chose you, Leo. You're here because you calculated I was the better investment," he replied, and I felt a surge of pride. My son was finally seeing her clearly. "You kept him as your backup plan." Julian stepped forward again, still holding the folder. "She was planning to come back to me after she secured her position in your family." "Why would I marry him if I didn't love him?" Isabella cried out. The question hung in the air, and I could see the guests exchanging knowing glances. They all knew the answer. She married him for his money, his status, his family name. Love was never part of the equation. "Show them the rest," I prompted Jonathan. He pulled out another hotel receipt. "The Mandarin Oriental, last month, presidential suite. She told you she was visiting her sister in Boston, didn't she, Leo?" Leo's face was like stone. "Yes, she was with me," Julian stated. Then, as someone from the crowd yelled, "Read the messages," he smiled coldly and unfolded a printed conversation. "I can't wait to be done with this charade. Leo is so boring, Julian. He actually believes I love him. I feel like I'm performing in a play every day." "And your reply, Isabella?" "Because his trust fund is worth 20 million and his father owns half of downtown. Once I'm legally family, I'll have access to everything. Then we can be together for real." A collective intake of breath swept the terrace. She hadn't just deceived my son, she had mocked him. "You were performing," Leo said slowly. "The whole thing was a performance." "No, some of it was real," she stammered, reaching for him. He pulled away. "Stop," Leo said sharply. Just stop talking." He turned to the guests. "I want to apologize to all of you for wasting your time. The marriage you came to witness was based on fraud. The wedding is over. Please, feel free to take your gifts with you. The bar will remain open for another hour, but I need to leave." He started to walk away, then turned back to Isabella. "Don't come home tonight. Don't come home ever. Your belongings will be packed and sent to you. We're done." "You can't just leave me here," she cried. He faced her one last time, his voice calm and authoritative. "No, Isabella, this was your performance. The wedding was just the stage." And with that, my son walked away from his bride of 6 hours, leaving her alone in her expensive dress, surrounded by 200 people who now knew her for exactly what she was. The crowd began to disperse, slowly, still filming her humiliation. Jonathan approached her. "You made your choice, Isabella. How's that working out for you?" "Jonathan, please," she sobbed. "I always loved you." "No," he said simply. "You never loved either of us enough to be honest." He tucked the folder back into his jacket and walked away, leaving her utterly alone. I approached her slowly, savoring the moment. She looked up at me with desperate eyes. "Please," she whispered, "help me fix this. You're his father." I smiled down at her. "My dear, why would I want to fix this? This is exactly what I wanted to happen." The realization dawned. "You planned this. You brought Julian here." "I invited a friend to a family celebration," I replied smoothly. "It's not my fault he had such interesting stories to share. You destroyed my marriage." "No, darling. You destroyed your marriage the moment you decided to betray my son. I simply turned on the lights so everyone could see what you'd done." I leaned in closer, my voice a whisper only she could hear. "You asked me what I was doing here. You said I wasn't invited. Well, now you know. I was here to watch you fall. And it was even more beautiful than I imagined." Her legs finally gave out, and she sank to the ground in her designer dress. And I walked away, leaving her exactly where she belonged, alone, exposed, and facing the consequences of underestimating Arthur Ellison. The story of Isabella Vance's wedding catastrophe spread like a contagion. By Sunday morning, videos of Julian's revelation were all over social media. The real damage, however, was happening in the circles that Isabella had been so desperate to join. The country club members, the charity boards, the business networks. These people didn't need the internet. They had phones and a practiced skill for social demolition. I spent Sunday tending to my roses, selectively answering calls from influential friends. To each, I painted Leo as the resilient victim, relieved to have learned the truth, and I refused to discuss Isabella further, which only confirmed her guilt in their eyes. By evening, the narrative was set in stone. Isabella, I learned, had spent the night at a hotel, causing a hysterical scene in the lobby. On Monday, she began a frantic campaign to salvage the situation, calling Leo, me, and even wedding guests, with a wild story about a conspiracy. No one believed her. The local paper's society column on Tuesday simply mentioned the wedding was off due to unforeseen circumstances, code for a scandal of the highest order. On Wednesday, the first real consequence hit. She was fired from her job at a boutique art gallery. The owner couldn't have her reputation tarnished. On Thursday, her exclusive gym membership was revoked after she got into an argument with other members. By Friday, her own parents, mortified by the scandal, issued a public statement disavowing her behavior and apologizing to my family. Within a week, Isabella Vance had lost her husband, her job, her social standing, and her family's support. But I wasn't done. A ruined present is one thing. Ensuring a ruined future requires more foresight. I hired a digital marketing firm to ensure that the videos and articles about her wedding disaster would dominate any search results for her name for years to come. I also had my lawyer discreetly provide verified information to several high society blogs. Isabella became a cautionary tale whispered across 3 states. David, meanwhile, recovered splendidly. He was inundated with sympathy and support. 2 weeks after the non-wedding, we had dinner. "I need time to trust my own judgment again," he told me. "That's wise," I said. "But don't let one calculating woman make you suspicious of all women. There are good people in this world." 3 weeks after the disaster, Isabella made her final foolish play. She showed up at my office, unannounced, dressed in a conservative suit, attempting to project an air of respectability. "We need to talk," she said. She claimed to have documented my conspiracy against her, my meetings with Julian, the private investigator, the digital campaign. She placed a tablet on my desk. "I want financial compensation for the damage you've caused," she demanded, "and you will help me rebuild my reputation. Or else I go to the press with proof that the great Arthur Ellison orchestrated the public humiliation of his son's bride." I laughed. "Miss Vance," I said, "let me explain leverage to you. It only works when you have something the other party fears losing. You seem to think I would be embarrassed if people knew I orchestrated your downfall. You fundamentally misunderstand my position in this community." I stood and walked to my window, overlooking the city. "I am Arthur Ellison. I have a 30-year reputation for integrity and results. The story that I protected my son from a woman who betrayed him would only make me more admired, not less. You manipulated 2 good men and planned to commit marriage fraud. Nothing I did was illegal or even unethical. It's what any protective parent would do." I picked up her tablet. "The humiliation was entirely of your own making. I didn't write those text messages. I didn't force you to lie. All I did was ensure the truth came to light." The color was draining from her face as the futility of her position sank in. "Here is your actual situation," I continued, my voice calm and final. "You have no job, no social standing, and no credibility. If you take this story to a tabloid, you will face a legal battle you cannot afford against an opponent with unlimited resources. More importantly, you will only refresh the public's memory of your own treachery. Is that what you want?" She stared at me in silence, finally understanding. "You are going to leave my office," I instructed her, "and you will never contact my family again. You will take what little money you have and relocate. If you conduct yourself with some semblance of humility and honesty for the next several years, you might find a second chance." "You think you've won?" she seethed as I opened the door for her. "Miss Vance," I said, "I have already won. Your presence here is simply the victory lap." "You're a monster," she spat. "No," I replied, closing the door on her face. "I'm a father who protected his son from a predator." She left town 2 days later. 6 months passed. Jonathan Croft called me with an update. Isabella was in Atlanta, working as a restaurant hostess. She had contacted him, begging for another chance, for money. When he refused, she threatened to go to the press with the same conspiracy story. He told her to go ahead, that she'd only humiliate herself further. She ended up screaming at him in the restaurant and had to be escorted out by security. The pattern was clear: denial, anger, bargaining, and desperation. Over the next year, I heard sporadic updates. She tried to break into Atlanta's social scene, but the story of her wedding had followed her. She was fired from a string of low-wage jobs for her poor attitude. She couldn't accept her new reality. A year after the wedding, I learned she was a bartender at an airport hotel. Then, her mother called me, desperate. Isabella was harassing her parents for money, threatening to ruin their reputation if they didn't take out a second mortgage to fund her new start. Her mother begged me to have Leo talk to her, to give her some kind of closure. "Mrs. Vance," I said gently but firmly, "what you're asking is impossible. The kindest thing you can do for your daughter is to stop enabling her. Until she faces real consequences, she will never change." She finally, tearfully, agreed that I was right. Haley's downfall was complete, not because I had destroyed her, but because her entire life was built on a foundation of lies, and when that crumbled, she had nothing left. 2 years after the wedding, she appeared at my front door on a rainy night, a shadow of her former self. She looked gaunt, her clothes were cheap, her hair unkempt. She gave a pathetic performance of apology and remorse, begging for a job, for any kind of second chance. I saw right through it. "Miss Vance," I said, holding the door open for her to leave, "you are not a victim. You are a predator who finally met someone more dangerous than yourself." Her desperation finally erupted into pure rage. "You think you're so perfect," she snarled. "You're just a bitter old man who couldn't stand to see his son happy." "There it is," I said calmly. "The real Isabella Vance, not the victim, but the entitled creature who believes the world owes her something." She turned and walked off into the rain, a defeated figure disappearing into the darkness. I closed the door and returned to my fireside. I never saw her again. Today, 3 years have passed since the wedding that never was. My son, Leo, is getting married in 2 months to a wonderful woman named Sarah, a woman who is genuine, secure, and kind. This morning, I received a final call from Julian Croft. He'd heard that Isabella is also remarrying. Her new husband is a truck driver in South Carolina. She has apparently told him, and everyone in her new life, that she is a tragic widow, still lying, even now. As I reflect on it all, I feel no regret, only a profound sense of satisfaction. Some might call my actions cruel, but they have never had to watch someone they love be methodically deceived. My actions weren't about anger, they were about restoring balance. They were about ensuring that actions have consequences, and that respect, once commanded, is maintained. This story ends not with forgiveness, but with justice. If you appreciate tales where the scales are finally balanced and truth prevails, then this is the place for you. Subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell, because there are many more stories of hidden wounds and quiet reckonings to be told. You won't want to miss what comes next.